Welcome everybody to Indivisible Text Ledge Live. We are excited to be with you today. It is Sunday, May 2nd, 2021. And if you saw a post from us just a second ago, we had a little bit of a glitch. So we are rebooting, and Jason, this is take two, right?
Take two.
Well, like I mentioned, Jason, it's May. We're already in the second day of May. This ledge session is really flying by. How are you feeling now that we're in the final month of the 87th legislature?
Oh man, it's a kind of a dual feeling of exciting, a certain dread about where it's gone. So we'll have to see how the suspense plays out for the next month here.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of things that are still happening on the ledge, and this is really crunch time. This is the fourth quarter. All of the sports analogies you want to use, and we really have an opportunity to try to stop bad legislation and get good legislation passed, or we can unfortunately have some really bad legislation that is going to be in place here in Texas. So let's talk about some of the top stories that are going on in the Twitter world from this last week. A lot has happened, and we have all the links lined up in our post. And if you have any comments or any questions, feel free to put them in the chat either on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll get to them for sure.
Definitely. And my internet connection does seem to be a little bit finicky right now, so we may be fading in and out here a bit. That's not right. Let me find the right window here. There we go. Sorry about that. This week, I think the theme for me this week, at least, of for the ledge was just how removed the priorities of the legislature are from the priorities of everyday Texans. And I'm not the only one who was noticing this. Texas Tribune had an article this week about how unprepared we were for the COVID pandemic and how much the ledge so far has focused on things that have nothing to do with these huge issues. Very little about the power outages for the winter storm, very little about things like Medicaid expansion, very little about COVID preparation, and a very mixed bag what has made it in about COVID preparation, and a whole lot about culture war issues like abortion and permitless carrying of handguns and targeting transgender kids. I encourage everybody just to take a look at this article because I thought it did a really good job of really making the point about how removed we are from this. We have to think that this is happening mainly because people aren't paying attention. That there's so much going on at the national news level that the state stuff kind of slips under the radar and is confusing for people, but it's happening there right now.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely one of the big factors here, Jason, and why our organization exists, and a lot of organizations in the state of Texas that are trying to elevate what's happening at the state capitol so that more and more Texans understand what is going on. And this is definitely an uphill battle because they're used to nobody paying attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I think back that throughout the history of Texas, that the longest tenured governor is Governor Rick Perry, who, if you ask any Texan, what is something that Rick Perry did that, was helped Texas or laws that were passed, or what was his platform? A lot of people would probably just shrug their shoulders like, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But he was the governor for the longest amount of time than we've had any other governor in Texas. And I think that's all by design, like we know, so that people don't pay attention. People aren't aware of who's representing them in the state capitol. And so that way they can pass these laws because the legislature only happens every 2 years.
Yep.
It's only for 140 days. It feels like, oh, well, that's so insignificant. It probably doesn't matter, but
Right.
it matters a lot
It
because we
matters a lot.
pass a 2-year budget that is in the hundreds of billions of dollars for the millions of Texans that live here. And so another part of it, I think, is it's a little bit, maybe you're seeing some aggressive action because Republican leadership that we have right now, and the particular type of Republican leadership that we have right now, feels like they may be getting close to their last leg. And
Mhm.
so they're really trying to do everything they can to sustain power, to keep the state of Texas in a way, especially with the permitless carrying of handguns. I mean, that's just
Mhm.
trying to invite chaos, not
Yes.
expanding Medicaid so many families don't have health coverage. That's inviting more chaos, not being prepared for the pandemic or handling it in a way where we're prioritizing people's safety and over 50,000 Texans die. Chaos. Texas
Yep.
freeze, where every Texan is impacted by a week-long freeze, and so many millions of Texans lost their electricity and power, running water. Chaos. And so this
Yep.
really feels like this is their game plan. They want to have as much chaos and trying to get over the finish line to get as much power and personal benefit that they can.
Yep. And while all that's going on, we get some things in the background that really show how the system works, I think. So we get things like this bill that's being pushed, and it is actually looking like it has a pretty good chance of making it, if not all the way through, a pretty good part of the way through the process of limiting liability for trucking companies that where their truckers are involved in deadly accidents. And you know, and there are all kinds of justifications about what this would do for commerce in Texas, whatever. But at the heart of it, it just means that these companies can be irresponsible and hurt people and not have to pay the consequences. And we're going to protect that. And you have to wonder who's funding this kind of effort, and why is, with all the issues that are pressing in the state, why is this getting airtime and not these other things? The same thing with a couple of other issues I wanted to highlight. Really, I just included these just to highlight how small some of these are. There's this neighborhood in the Austin area, Lost Creek, that is unhappy because they lost it's a very upscale neighborhood. They lost a property tax exemption that they had for a while for these big houses that are right down on the lake in Austin. And they're well connected to Texas Lege lobbyists, and have been pushing to just be de-annexed from Austin so that they don't have to pay these property taxes. And so there's this back route way that there's all this chaos on the surface, and then in the back rooms, there's these kinds of deals that are happening. And the Senate always finds time for these kinds of bills, even when they don't find time for the big issues that are really facing us.
Yeah, I mean, this is a priority versus expanding Medicaid for the millions of Texans to get coverage. I mean, this is just, it's frustrating to see this kind of stuff happen, but this is why we need every Texan to be engaged, to be, making those calls to action, completing those calls to action, contacting your senator and your rep, because they need to hear from you. And most importantly, come 2022, we need you to vote. We need to completely change the leadership in the state legislature, and we can do that in 2022.
Yep, that's right. But we have to have people paying attention and letting this legislature know that they're paying attention, and see what's happening here. Moving on to some of these bigger issues that are facing the state and that are not having so much done about them. There was a report out this week that one of the I think maybe not so recognized aspects of this big winter storm that we had was that a really large number of people got carbon monoxide poisoning. Right, they would go sit in their cars to stay warm, or run the gas stove in their house, or whatever, and and would wind up either dying or coming close to it from carbon monoxide poisoning. And there are steps the state legislature could be taking, requiring carbon monoxide alarms in homes, and et cetera, and really addressing the power grid problems that we're not doing, and that we've spent very little time on in this session relative to the scale of the problem. Again, I would encourage everybody.
Go ahead.
Well, I just would encourage everybody to take a look at this article and just get a feel for the problem. And
what's so disheartening is that it feels like there's this collective kind of shrug about this. When you have an experience as unique as the Texas freeze in Texas, I mean, that's not something that we're used to and that people are prepared for or people think about. There's a lot of mistakes that can happen in how people are trying to cope with it. And so for that to lead to the biggest epidemic of carbon monoxide poisoning in recent history is just baffling. And this is what our state leadership is doing to Texans. They're putting us in positions where more and more Texans are suffering. And all of this could have been avoided. They knew this could happen 10 years ago and didn't do anything about it. And there's unfortunately a chance that they'll do a little bit about it right now.
Yep. Yeah. And we should say going into summer that there have been, the possibility has been floated that we'll be faced with rolling blackouts this summer as well. We probably won't have the carbon monoxide problem with that, but there'll be its own set of problems if it happens. The grid is still very vulnerable and doesn't seem to be able to really support the state, and we're not seeing real action on it. When there were hearings on it, and some of the legislation that was being pushed around the power grid failure was oriented towards this idea that the problem had been renewable energy sources like solar and wind, which we all knew it was ridiculous at the time. The numbers at the time were ridiculous. But ERCOT released a new report this week using a different measurement for what they were expecting from wind power that really showed that the big failure here was the natural gas plants. That was really where our state's power grid did it. And and so we need to be hearing about how those plants, if we're going to continue to rely on them, how they're going to winterize their both the plants themselves and the pipelines and the distribution mechanisms that get the natural gas from the wells to the plants, which is really where a lot of the freeze happened. And this other question of why isn't our state power grid connected to one of the larger national grids? That would have solved this problem as well. Why are we insisting on doing this all by ourselves at the expense of Texans?
Yeah, and this is what's so frustrating is that we have leadership in Texas, both at the state level and the federal level, that don't care about the truth. And we're from the onset, when we were hearing that natural gas was the problem and people were sharing that, they decided to use this as an opportunity to lie to the public and to try to say that it was wind turbines and things of that sort that were the ultimate problem. Both our governor did that, other state legislature, members of the state legislature did that. We had U.S. senators do that, as like Cancun Cruz, as he was leaving the country to have more comfort for his family. And they do this for somebody to outright lie for this, for political points and to avoid any kind of accountability. They do that because they know they can. And unfortunately, too many Texans won't pay attention. And this should upset us. This should motivate us. And this should help us see clearly that they are not trying to serve Texans and to try to make our lives improved and better. They are simply trying to look out for their own personal interest and the interest of the few at the top of the spectrum of people in Texas in terms of like oil and gas providers and people who own that kind of stuff, versus the everyday Texans that were suffering, and so very many died from this. And so don't be fooled. They don't care. And this is proof.
Yep. Right. Well said, Alex. Shifting our focus a bit, there was some drama around the SB 7 and HB 6 bills this week. So SB 7 and HB 6 are the bills that are the voter suppression bills, really, that are being introduced to address the non-existent problem of quote unquote election integrity, even though we had no evidence that the 2020 election was anything but the most secure election in our history already. And so, SB 7, both of these bills, I think, have been, I can't actually remember the status of HB 6, but SB 7 is passed out of the Senate and is in the House committee now, where it has to go through the approval process there. This week, the chair of the House Elections Committee, Briscoe Cain, rated by Texas Monthly as Texas's worst legislator, had a sudden, out of the blue hearing for this bill, so which was really unheard of and unprecedented. So there was no advance notice, no option to take public comments on this bill, very limited time for any amendments, with no debate on them. The amendments were offered and then voted on immediately. As the Texas Civil Rights Project pointed out, this was a blatant power grab. And I love this graphic where the Democratic co-chair of the committee was calling out what was the proceedings that were happening in very direct language. Yep. Right. Yeah. And calling it like it is.
Right.
Yeah. And you have to wonder, like, why do they feel the need to sneak this through? Why do they not want public comment on these things? And I can only think of one good reason: that they want to keep it under the radar, which, like we've been talking about today.
Yeah, because there's legitimate concerns with this legislation, and my understanding, and definitely if you're watching and you have a little bit more information, or if you want to correct us on anything, please feel free to put in the comments. But essentially, SB 7 was brought up before the committee, and they wanted to substitute the bill with the House HB 6. And they provided it to the committee members before the committee meeting started, so they didn't have a chance to actually look at the substitute language to see if it truly was HB 6. And you heard different legislators saying, look, we just got this. We don't trust you. This is what you're saying. Because Representative Cain was saying, we don't need to have hearings. We don't need to have anything. We've already had public hearings on HB 6. We're just substituting it for SB 7, and wanting to really push through the process and try to speed it as much as he can. And this is why it was just bullshit. Legislators are wanting time to be able to review it, to read it, to see if there's been any changes. It's a big enough document for them to want to make sure. And because of the tactics that we've seen from Republican leadership so far in trying to, undermine the process and trying to push through, and we see this on the Senate side with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick changing the rules every session so that the Republicans have the majority in terms of the decision making there. And so this was a power grab, and for me, this was voter suppression in action.
Yep.
Chairman Cain didn't want to hear from the committee members, didn't want to have amendments, didn't want to give time for testimony. So he just shut all that down to try to push this. This is what they're trying to do to our vote. Exactly what he did with this legislation. They want to suppress our ability to challenge them and to be able to look into what they're doing. And so, as clear as day, just like what we were talking about earlier, they don't care about you, and you need to start realizing that and helping every Texan realize that, and help us help every Texan realize that we need this leadership completely taken out of the legislature because they do not have our best interests. and we can vote them out come 2022. For right now, we can try to hold them accountable with this process.
But I can't. Yeah, and we should also mention, well, let me actually hit this first. This is just another article about this from the Texas Tribune. I wanted to highlight this subtweet about the House Speaker Dade Phelan's office, because Phelan has a certain reputation as being a moderate in the House. He manages to play that up, but he's actively not just allowing but encouraging this kind of behavior in these committees. So he's not. I think that we on the left need to be careful about thinking about him as our friend too much. He's on board with all of these radical proposals and willing to use all the levers of power in the House to ram these things through like they're doing.
Yeah, definitely the image that he presents and what he tries to do in certain areas for people to be comfortable with him. We see that the actions he's taken with moving legislation forward is not on the side of Texans. He's trying to push a lot of bad legislation forward. He's trying to, he's encouraging this. He's the one who appointed Briscoe Cain as the elections chair. That decision alone should tell all of us exactly what his intentions are. Briscoe Cain has shown his complete ineptitude. He's completely inadequate in this role. And Dade Phelan put him there. And so that tells us a lot about Speaker Phelan, and we really need a lot of pressure from his district, but from all Texans with Speaker Phelan, because he is supporting a very radical approach to how Texas needs to move forward, with trying to make voting much more confrontational, trying to suppress the vote, and all of these other areas with anti-abortion or anything else that we're seeing. It's really horrendous how he's, I want to say in quotes, quote unquote, leading the House, because I would not call this leadership. This is just, in the face of every Texan, and it should really, really motivate us to try to stop them.
Right. And we should also note that, there was no question about Briscoe Cain's positions on any of this or whatnot. I mean, he spent January going to Pennsylvania to help push false claims that the election had been stolen from Trump there. He's made no secret of who he is. And yet Dade Phelan, even knowing all that, decided to put him in charge of this committee. So, moving on to the permitless carry issue, this bill had passed out of the House and into the Senate. It seemed like there was nowhere near enough support for it in the Senate. Dan Patrick took this unusual step of creating a special committee to hear this bill, headed by Dr. Schwertner, and that hearing happened this week, and they kind of pushed it on out of that committee. So it's next step is going to be the Senate floor, and we'll see what happens with it there. It's unclear, but this bill is progressing and has a not unreasonable chance to pass out of this session. There's a lot of far right-wing pressure on the Lege to get this through, and part of the problem for Dan Patrick is that he doesn't have 18 Republicans in the Senate to pass it, although they need all 18. And he made this kind of enigmatic quote this week that to pass the bill, we need all 18 Republicans to support it, unless I pull a rabbit out of the hat. And I may have a rabbit out of the hat if I don't have 18. And nobody's real sure what this means, but we have to think that it must mean that there's some more moderate Democrat that he's courting who might be possibly switching votes on this. And I think it highlights one of the reasons that we really need better Democrats in this state as well. We need people who are going to be solid.
A lot of people ask
we're
us
just to this.
Exactly. No worries. We get comments every once in a while when we are challenging the leadership in Texas, which is a trifecta. It's Republican leadership, for the governor, the House, and the Senate. And our attorney general is also Republican. And so we get sometimes we get questions about, oh, you're only bashing Republicans. Well, they're the ones who are in leadership, and they're the ones pushing a lot of this bad stuff. So yes, they get the attention. But whenever we do see Democrats supporting horrible things, and this could include Democrats like House Pub Ed Chairman Representative Dutton out of Houston.
Mm-hmm.
He has not been on our side when it comes to our positions around charter schools, or it comes to transgender students. And so there's been a lot of concerns, and that there's been pushback in that space. And so if the rabbit in the hat, like you said, is a moderate Democrat who ends up supporting this, we absolutely need to replace that person, because they are contributing to the chaos in Texas, and once again, making us unsafe. And that is not what we need right now in our state. We just need better representation. We need better leadership. We need better legislators in a lot of different areas. And so we will definitely highlight that if that ends up being the case, and calling that out.
Yep. Two last notes on this. I want to just highlight that this permitless carry, we hear a lot from the right wing about support for the police, and there are other bills winding their way through the legislature this year that are taking on attempts in various cities in the state to reduce police budgets, to redirect some of that spending into services that could help prevent crime rather than just taking an enforcement approach. So we see a lot about support for police officers there, but when the police show up on bills like this and say no, and in this case, the Houston Police Officers Union is putting their foot down and saying hard no to permitless carry, because the police don't want a bunch of lunatics who have no training running around with guns out there. It's going to make their lives so much more dangerous. And so, of course, they're stepping up and saying no. But we don't see Republicans showing fealty to the police when these types of issues are up. And
once again, another example, because the current leadership we have will just flat out lie. They do not care about serving the public. And so if they can use issues around police accountability to divide and to cause chaos, and say that, we back the police, and to be, completely negative towards efforts like Black Lives Matter and all of the protests and all of the things that people are trying to speak about, violence against Black Americans, against Black and brown communities from the police. But then on this, to just completely ignore the police, because now they know better than the police. This just shows you that we are all pawns in their game. They just want to control, to cause chaos, to personally benefit. And so whatever bumper sticker slogan they're putting on for the day or for the week, it is just to manipulate Texans to fight against each other, really. So that they can stay in power. The ultimate solution we have for this is to remove these particular leaders from their positions by voting them out. We need to vote them out. We will also put pressure on them to resign, because if they have it in their heart to leave, then here's the door. We're more than happy to show it to you. But we need to be prepared that the real solution is going to be to vote them out. And this is why the voter suppression, this is why permitless carry, instead of Medicaid expansion, because we've been in a pandemic and we've seen over 50,000 Texans die from this pandemic. Instead of motivating around Medicaid expansion, they're motivating around permitless carry bill, which the police force is telling us will not be good for us. This will cause chaos. This will cause more violence, and they don't care. That's what they want.
Yep. And one last note on this. There had been some question about whether Abbott would be willing to sign a permitless carry bill if it came across his desk. As spineless as he is, we all suspected that if it made its way there, he would, of course, cave to the NRA pressure and sign it, and he confirmed that this week. So if this bill makes it out of the Senate, it will be, it's likely to become law here. So we're pretty close to this happening. Doesn't make me feel more safe, I gotta say.
No, definitely not. And this is why this last month of the legislature is so important, because these bills will get to the point where they've passed both the House and the Senate. And then come June, it's going to be on the table for the governor to sign. So we still have an opportunity throughout May, if it does get past that point within the legislature, to start putting pressure on Abbott. And you're going to see a lot of requests from us and from other organizations to start contacting the governor around various efforts. And the more and more people get vaccinated, the more and more we may see these type of efforts take place in person. And so be on the lookout. We're going to make sure that our voice is heard and people where Texans fall on this particular issue. And we don't want this passed. We don't want this implemented as law.
Yep. I had more. Oh yeah. So this other bill, we're heavy on gun control today, apparently, is being voted on to make Texas a Second Amendment sanctuary state, which, I mean, good grief, could you have any more pretentious name for this? But basically the idea is that if the federal government passes gun control laws, then this bill would order local and state law enforcement not to enforce those laws. And it's largely symbolic. It feels, again, like not something that's going to make us safer here. And a waste of resources that could be spent on Medicaid expansion, power grid, COVID response, all of it.
Yeah. They want easy access to guns. They don't want easy access to the ballot box. They don't want easy access to healthcare. And so this tells you where their priorities are. It's not to empower the voice of Texans. It's not to help Texans stay healthy with health insurance. It's so that people have guns. And so we know that the more open this is going to be, the more violence is going to happen. And so that's what they want. And they're showing it to you clear as day.
Yep. One of the other big issues that's been happening is these very restrictive forced pregnancy bills that are making their way through the Texas House. These would be some of the most extreme anti-abortion bills in the country. This particular issue with them really just hits me every time I see it, that these bills would let anyone sue an abortion provider, whether or not they knew someone who had an abortion. So if there's an abortion provider in state, anybody, anywhere can sue them. And this creates a legal cause for action for that. And so it creates this huge amount of liability for anybody who is going to be involved in providing abortions. And really, this is just a way of targeting abortion without outright outlawing it, although they're pretty close to to that with these bills as well. And there were a huge number of lawyers this week sent a letter in to Dave Phelan and Dan Patrick about these bills, registering their opposition, noting that they are unconstitutional according to the Texas Constitution and undermine the kind of conventions of our legal system that don't set up causes for action like this, where anybody can just sue anybody for anything.
Yeah, and this is kind of the theme of our live session this weekend, is that how is the current Texas leadership trying to cause chaos in Texas? The bills would let anyone sue an abortion provider whether or not they know someone who had an abortion. You're just inviting conflict. You're just inviting Texans to fight each other around this issue. And so they are doing this in a way that, as these lawyers state, go against our own Constitution. And so whenever you hear them say about, oh, the Constitution is this, this is what the intentions are, we cannot question this. They love questioning it whenever they want to cause chaos in Texas. And that's exactly what they're trying to do.
Yep, absolutely. Also, in the realm of things that the Senate is spending time on, they passed a bill out of the Senate this week that defined providing or consenting to gender confirmation care for children as child abuse. And there, if you go and watch the testimony for around these bills, it's really heartbreaking, right? Because you have these families with transgender kids who are showing up there, and these kids are often the most picked on and bullied people in their communities in the first place. And you have parents who are struggling to protect them and honor their who they are. And some of these families have showed up and gone so far as to say, like, if this passes, they have to leave the state. That this is they can't be here in a place that's just going to criminalize them and their children in this way. And it's really cruel and, again, pointless. Like, as you've been saying, just to sow chaos. It does nothing to address the real issues that are facing Texas and whose lives are already hard.
Yeah, this is what a bully looks like, right? They pick on a community because they can, because they have power. And this is a community that doesn't have a lot of power and is continuing to try to help people understand their perspective and their considerations. And instead of that, we have leaders in Texas that want to punish them. And so this is the workings of a bully that you see right in front of our eyes. And like we've been saying, Jason, like you just said, to cause chaos. Well, it looks like Jason had mentioned there's a
y'all.
Hiccups. There you go. Looks like he's back.
Let's see. All right, where were we? Right. All right. So a couple of last things to note. There was this incident also at the Lege this past in the last couple of weeks, where there was a suggestion that a lobbyist had drugged a staffer to make sexual advances on her. And so there's been some back and forth around this. I really, when I first moved to Austin, which was about 20 years ago, I was friends with some actual lobbyists at the Lege. And I remember some of their stories from 20 years ago about the wild stuff that would go on during session. And you would have thought that in the last 20 years that would have gotten better. But as this incident kind of suggested, it hasn't really. And you have to wonder how this institution that seems to be so intent on attacking women's rights it doesn't seem like a mystery that they can't protect their staffers from this kind of behavior. Fortunately, this week, Representative Sinfronia introduced a bill requiring lobbyists to have sexual harassment training. That seems like a pretty minimal standard given what goes on up there. But at least it's better than nothing here. But I think this incident captures the kind of anti-woman environment that we see out of the Texas Lege. It really is a good
old boys network. Yeah, completely unacceptable. And we heard through this story coming out, you saw on Twitter and in different spaces, a lot of journalists and policy advocates, lobbyists sharing their stories and their experience that, there's this talk that women staffers tend to have because of the aggressive behavior that lobbyists will put towards them. And this is horrendous. This is something that's disgusting, that we should not tolerate. And the fact that the current leadership that's been a part of the state leadership has been there for several sessions, including Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and Attorney General Ken Paxton is nowhere to be found on this in terms of things that need to be done in regarding the law. This is a low priority for them. And unfortunately, women's safety, women's health is a low priority for them across the board.
Yep. Our last item today, we got some news out of the Census Bureau that Texas will gain 2 new seats in Congress when we are drawing new district maps later this year. There's some suggestion that, Texas really, we kind of rolled our eyes at the census this year and didn't really do much to push it, but we could have probably had 3 seats at least if we had really fully done the count of people. But particularly communities of color were undercounted in big ways, and so we're here with 2 seats. We won't have the official data for this until I believe the end of September was the last date I heard. So there'll certainly be a special session later this year for this. It's going to throw Texas elections into a real, it's going to throw a wild card into those elections next year because we're not quite sure what the districts are going to be. This will affect both state legislature districts and federal level districts. And so this is going to be, once this session is over, this story is probably going to be our focus for a while. And the big thing that's on the horizon. We had originally thought that this redistricting process would be happening during this session. It didn't, which gave a lot of space for all this other stuff to go on. And now we're going to be having to address it come October.
Yeah, and this is where it'll be an active year with advocating with the state legislature because of redistricting. And to your point, Jason, really disappointing. A lot of people were expecting these 3 seats to be increased. And to hear the initial analysis that it may be because of just the undercounting and the lack of effort that we saw. Now, we also need to acknowledge we've been in the middle of a pandemic. That definitely had an impact on probably getting people to turn out and complete the census. But that's why we want a state leadership that is able to help offset that they're able to invest and to help coordinate and to have solutions so that we ensure that Texans are counted and that we are, getting as much representation as we deserve. And so we'll see what the impacts are with redistricting with the new maps. There's going to be a lot of work around that, so stay tuned. And yeah, seeing that more specific data will be interesting once it comes later in the year.
Yeah, right. That's all I got today.
Well, busy week as always with the state legislature. We only have a few more weeks to go. And so if you have not gotten plugged in yet, to contact your House rep, to contact your senator, um, let's start doing it. We're going to need a lot of action around, trying to stop bad legislation, trying to pass good legislation. And so also contacting Speaker Phelan on the House side, contacting the governor and lieutenant governor will be some key actions coming up in these next couple of weeks. And then also, the big thing that happened also this week was the conference committee for the House Appropriations Bill. And so, and for the House and Senate to come together to pass the budget. And so we're going to be keeping an eye on some key things, and we'll have some actions related to that as well. A lot happening. Stay tuned. Thanks so much for joining us. If you have questions or comments, put them in there on Facebook or YouTube, and we will see y'all again soon.